If, continued he, I had continued in France in 1815, I intended to have given publicity to some of the latter attempts that were made against me. The Mémorial affair in particular should have been solemnly investigated by the first court of the empire in Europe, would have shuddered to see to what an extent the crime of secret assassination could be carried. The 31st, at 5 o'clock, I went to join the emperor in the garden. We were all assembled there. The conversation turned on politics. He described the melancholy situation of England amidst her triumphs. He alluded to the immensity of her debt, the madness, the impossibility of her becoming a continental power, the dangers which assailed her constitution, the embarrassment of her ministers, and the just clamor of the people. England, with her 150 or 200,000 men, made as many efforts as he, the emperor, had ever made during the period. Of his great power, and perhaps even more, he had never employed beyond 500,000 French troops. The traces of his continental system were followed by all the powers on the continent, and would be pursued still further in proportion as those powers became more settled. He did not hesitate to say, and he proved it, that England would have gained by remaining faithful to the Treaty of Amiens, that such a line of conduct would have been to the advantage of all Europe, but that Napoleon himself and his glory would have suffered by it. Yet it was England, and not he, who broke the treaty. There was only one course, he continued, for England to pursue, namely to return to her constitution and abandon the military system to interfere with the continent only through her maritime influence, in which she was preeminent. It was, he said, easy to foresee that great calamities would assail her should she adopt any other course. And this she would inevitably do because all her aristocracy urged her to it, and because the folly, pride, or venality of her present ministry caused her to persist in the system she was pursuing. The conversation being concluded, the emperor returned to his study and desired me to follow him. He told me that a letter which had been sent to him from England by post was said to have been kept back by the governor, because it was not addressed him officially. And it was said that a letter for the Grand Marshal had been detained for the same reason. The emperor observed that if this were true, there was something peculiarly cruel in the conduct of the governor in having sent back the letters without even mentioning them to us, without affording us the consolation of knowing from whom they came. A neglected form, he said, might easily be corrected in the island, but it could not so easily be observed at 2,000 leagues distance. I told the emperor that a circumstance nearly similar to that which he had just mentioned had occurred to me 8 or 10 days back. A person who was on his way to Europe had tormented me with his offers of service. I yielded to his solicitations and commissioned him to order me some shoes and to get a watch changed for me, for there is no person here who knows how to repair a watch. The governor had forbidden the execution of those commissions because they had not been addressed to himself. I have said nothing on the subject to anyone, sire, because it is a principle with me to conceal an insult for which I cannot obtain redress, but I shall find an opportunity to tell the governor my mind. In the meantime, neither he nor the person to whom I gave the commission have been able to draw from me a line or a single word through the latter, has made several attempts to do so. After dinner, the emperor, conversing on our situation and the conduct of the governor who came today, and took a rapid circuit round Longwood, referred to the subject of the last interview they had had together and made some striking observations respecting it. I behaved very ill to him, no doubt, said he, and nothing but my present situation could excuse me, but it was out of humor, and could not help it. I should blush for it in any other situation. Had such a scene taken place at the Tuileries, I should have felt myself bound and conscious to make some atonement. Never during the period of my power did I speak harshly to anyone without afterwards saying something to make amends for it. But here I uttered not a syllable of conciliation, for I had no wish to do so. However, the governor proved himself very insensible to my severity. His delicacy did not seem wounded by it. I should have liked for his sake to have seen him evince a little anger or pull the door violently after him when he went away. This would at least have shown that there was some spring and elasticity about him, but I found nothing of the kind. The emperor then again resumed his conversation on political affairs, which he maintained with so much spirited interest that I could have forgotten for a time what part of the world I was in. I could have believed myself still at the Tuileries or in the Rue de Bourgogne. The Battle of Tagliamento. Number 1. Situation of Italy at the commencement of 1797. The Peace of Tolentino had reestablished our relations with Rome. The court of Naples was satisfied with the moderation of the French with respect to the Pope, in which it saw approved that it was the intention of the Republic not to interfere with its domestic affairs or to give any support to the discontented. We were masters of the Republic of Genoa. The oligarchical party in that state had lost all credit. The Cispidan and the Transpidan republics were animated with the best spirit. They afforded us every kind of assistance. In Piedmont, the fortresses of Alessandria, Finestrella, Cherasco, Konya, and Tortona were garrisoned by French troops. Susa, La Brunette, and Dissouan had been demolished. Misery and discontent were at the highest pitch amongst the people. Insurrections against the court had been attempted in several provinces. The King of Sardinia had assembled his troops of the line to form an army to suppress these disturbances. The French general had done everything possible to maintain order and tranquility in Piedmont. He had often threatened to march his troops against the malcontents, but the communications were restored between France, Piedmont, and the Cispidan and Transpidan republics. The spirit which prevailed in these republics spread into Piedmont. The French officers and soldiers, animated with the republican principles, propagated them throughout Italy. Circumstances were become such that it was necessary for the success of the French general's plans either to destroy the king of Sardinia or to relieve him from all anxiety and repress the disaffected. The French general conceived the idea of an offensive and defensive treaty with the court of Sardinia. It was signed by General Clarke and the Marquis of Saint-Marzin. The Republic guaranteed the king's crown. The king declared war against Austria and furnished a contingent of 10,000 men and 20 pieces of cannon to the French army. This treaty was of great importance to the execution of the grand plan of the general-in-chief. His army was thus reinforced, and he had hostages with him, who secured Piedmont to him during the absence from Italy. But the Directory did not feel the importance of this treaty and constantly adjourned its ratification. The publicity of the treaty, however, renewed the king's credit and discouraged the malevolent. The state of Venice alone excited alarm. Brescia, Bergamo, the Polesine, and part of the Vincentine and Paduan were perfectly well disposed to the French cause, but the Austrian party, which was that of the Venetian Senate, had at its disposal the greater part of the Veronese and 12 or 15,000 Sclavonians who were in Venice. Every scheme that Napoleon could think of for smoothing the difficulties having failed, he was compelled to proceed and to content himself with occupying the fortress of Verona and leaving a corps of reserve to watch the Venetian country and secure his rear. In the following chapter will be seen the reasons which prevented him from putting an end to the troubles of this republic. Previously to enter Germany. 2. The Emperor of Germany refuses to acknowledge the French Republic or enter into negotiations. The French general prepares to force him to do so. Both before and after the taking of Mantua, several pacific overtures had been made to the court of Vienna. They all proved fruitless. General Clarke had been sent for Paris with a letter from the Directory to the Emperor of Germany and full powers to negotiate and conclude the preliminaries of peace. A conference had taken place at Vicenza before the Battle of Rivoli between Clarke and Baron St. Vincent, the Emperor's aide-de-camp. The latter said that his master did not acknowledge the French Republic and could not hear him making peace without the concurrence of his ally, that is to say, of England. After the taking of Mantua, Clarke made a second attempt. He repaired to Florence and saw the Grand Duke. He obtained the same answer. The French general, being now free from all apprehensions with respect to Italy, resolved to drive the Austrians beyond the Julian Alps, to pursue them on the Drave and the Mur, to pass the simmering and to force the Emperor of Austria to sign Peace of Vienna. The project was vast. Success appeared certain. The General-in-Chief promised the French government to obtain peace in the course of the summer. The army of Italy had never been so fine, so numerous, or in better condition. It was composed of 8 divisions of infantry and 6,000 cavalry and had 150 pieces of cannon, well horsed. These troops were well clothed, shod, fed, and paid, and consisted of veteran soldiers and excellent officers. They formed an army of 60,000 men, equal to any enterprise. Since the taking of Mantua, the French army had directly menaced the hereditary states of the House of Austria, its advanced posts being on the frontiers. The French armies of the Rhine and the Sambre and Meuse, which had their winter quarters on the left bank of the Rhine, were separated from the army of Italy by a distance of more than 100 leagues by the states of the Germanic body. The army of Italy was distant about 180 leagues from Vienna, and the armies of the Rhine and the Sambre and Meuse more than 200 leagues. The army of Italy therefore attracted all the attention of the court of Vienna. Prince Charles, who had obtained some successes on the Danube in the preceding campaign, was sent to the Piave with a reinforcement of 40,000 men, the best troops of the monarchy. The Austrian engineers had been examining all the cols and heights of the Noric Alps, projecting entrenchments and drawing up plans for fortifying Grandiska, Klagenfurt, and Tarvis, but these works could not be commenced until after the melting of the snow, which does not disappear in the Noric Alps before the end of March. It was therefore important to get the start of the enemy before he could collect all his resources and entrench the gorges and difficult passages which were to be traversed. Napoleon resolved to be in Germany at the end of March. 3. Plan a campaign of the French army for marching on Vienna. The Brenner is the most lofty summit of the Alps of the Tyrol. It is the geographical division between Germany and Italy. The Inn, the Adda, and the Adige rise in this elevated chain of mountains. The Inns run from southwest to northeast for 50 leagues in the Tyrol, at the back of the Brenner, towards the Danube, into which it falls, dividing Bavaria from Austria. The Adda, the sources of which are near those of the Inn, runs from north to south and falls after a course of 8 leagues into the Lake of Como, on emerging from which it crosses Lombardy. The Adige, which has its source a few leagues from that of the Inn, runs from north to south for 50 leagues on the other declivity of the Brenner, enters Italy at Verona, whence it falls into the Adriatic near the mouth of the Po. A great number of tributary streams run into the different rivers and forms clefts between perpendicular rocks into which it is impossible to penetrate without being master of the heights. It is the ruggedest and most difficult part of the Alps, as well as the most intersected and steepest. There are only 3 great roads to Vienna from Italy, that of the Tyrol, that of Carinthia, and that of Carniola. The first crosses the upper chain of the Alps at the pass of the Brenner, the second at the pass of the Noric Alps between Monteba and Tarvis, the third at the pass of the Carnelian Alps, a few leagues from Laybach. According to the general law of the Alps, the pass of the Brenner is much more elevated than the pass of Tarvis, and the latter than that of Laybach. The road of the Tyrol commences at Verona, ascends the left bank of the Adige, passes Trent, Bolzano, Brixen, crosses the Brenner. 60 leagues from Verona, meets the Inn at Innsbruck. 9 leagues and a half further on, runs along by the Inn to halfway between Ratzenburg and Kufstein, whence in the course of 34 leagues and a half it reaches Salzburg, from which place it runs 32 leagues and passes. Ends on the Danube, and thus runs 36 leagues to Vienna. This road, which bears the name of the Tyrolese Road, runs therefore 171 leagues from Verona to Vienna. The Corinthian Road commences at St. Daniel, crosses the chain of the Noric Alps and enters Tarvis and Pateva in the course of 31 leagues, 24 leagues and a half from thence. It passes the Drap at Villach, crosses Klagenfurt, capital of Carinthia, 8 leagues from Villach, meets the Mur, which it follows to Junderberg, 20 leagues and a half further, and goes on to the Brook, a distance of 12 leagues in a serpentine direction. At Brook, the road leaves the Mur, and for 12 leagues ascends the Simmering, a mountain which divides the valley of the Danube from the valley of the Mur, and thence descends into the plain which leads to Vienna, a distance of only 20 leagues. It is then 97 leagues from the frontiers of Italy to Vienna, or from Saint-Denis, 127 leagues. The road of Carniola begins at Goritz, reaches Laybach at the distance of 27 leagues, passes the Save, the Alps, and descends on the Drave, which it passes at Marburg, 30 leagues and a half from Laybach. Thence it runs 4 leagues and a half to Ehrenhausen, where it meets the Mur. It runs along that river for 26 leagues to Bruck, passing Graz, the capital Styria, where it meets the Corinthian road. It is therefore 103 leagues from Goritz to Vienna by the road of Carniola. The Tyrolese road is joined to the Corinthian road by 6 transverse communications. First, a little above Brixen, a road called Putherthal turn to the right, ascends one of the tributary streams of the Adige, passes on to the Linz and Spital, and ends at Villach, 46 leagues and a half from Brixen. Secondly, a road turns off from Salzburg, which crosses Stadt, meets the Putherthal at Spital, and reaches Villach, 52 leagues from Salzburg. Thirdly, from the second crossroad, a road crosses off 4 leagues below Stadt, which follows the Mur as far as Scheifling, where it meets the Corinthian road. It is about 16 lengths in league. Fourthly, a road from Linz on the Danube, which passes the ends near Rottenmann, crosses high mountains, and descends on Judenberg. Fifthly, the ends on the Danube. A road ascends from the ends for about 20 leagues and descends on Lobin for about 8 leagues. Sixthly, from the Danube by St. Polten, there is a road to Bruck, which is about 24 leagues off. The 2 roads of Carniola and Carinthia are united by 3 transverse roads. First from Goritz, ascending the Inzonzo for 10 leagues, you reach Caporetto. Where is the road of Udine? 6 leagues higher, you meet with the Austrian Cusa. And finally, 5 leagues farther with Tarvis, where this road joins that of Pateba and Carinthia. Secondly, another road goes from Laybach, crosses the Save and the Drave, and in the course of 17 leagues reaches Klagenfurt. But this road is very difficult for artillery. Thirdly, from Marburg, a road ascends the Drave, and in about 25 leagues reaches Klagenfurt, where it meets the Corinthian road. Beyond Klagenfurt and Marburg, these 2 roads of Carinthia and Carniola run unparallel to each other, about 20 leagues apart, and have no cross communication practicable for wagons. Napoleon's plan was to penetrate into Germany by the road of Carinthia to cross Carniola and Styria and to reach the Simmering. But Prince Charles had 2 armies, one in the Tyrol and the other behind the Piave. It was therefore necessary to leave part of the army in observation against the army of the Tyrol. The French general preferred making the division of the Tyrol also act on the offensive, bringing them onto Brixen and directing them to Klagenfurt by the Putherthal road, whilst the principal corps of the army should advance in the Piave, cross the Tagliamento, debouch by the road of Carinthia on the Drave and the Villach, where it would be joined by its wing of the Tyrol, and then the whole army would march in junction on the Simmering. 3 divisions, forming a total of 15,000 men under the command of General Joubert, were destined for the operation of the Tyrol. 4 under the command of the General-Chief in person, amounting to 35,000 men, marched on the Tagliamento. The 8th, which was partly composed of the troops which had marched on Rome, was intended to form a corps of observation against Venice and to secure the tranquility of our rear. The generals of division, Barragay, Delier, and Delma, commanded in the Tyrol under Joubert. Generals Massena, Serrurier, Gaillou, and Bernadotte were at the head of the 4 divisions of infantry, which marched on the Tagliamento. General D'Agoa commanded the cavalry. The armies of the Rhine and the Sambre and Meuse were to pass the Rhine and enter Germany, so as to arrive on the Lech and the Danube at the same time as the French army should reach the Simmering. The Piedmont division, 10,000 strong, had been reckoned upon, but the delay of the ratification deprived the army of this important reinforcement. The 4th passage of the Piave, March 13th, in the Tyrol, the whole of the month of February, was passed in brisk skirmishes. The Austrians had appeared in force and with great audacity in that country. On the Piave, Prince Charles made several movements in order to take advantage of the separation of part of the French army, which he supposed to be detached on Rome. General Caillou thought himself menaced at Trevisa and repassed the Brenta. But Prince Charles, on receiving more accurate intelligence and finding that the French general had advanced with only 4,000 or 5,000 men on Rome, halted. Nothing took place but a few skirmishes. The French headquarters were fixed at Bassano in the beginning of March. The following proclamation was inserted in the order of the day: the taking of Mantua has just ended a campaign which has given you imperishable claims to the gratitude of your country. You've been victorious in 14 pitched battles and 70 other actions. You have made more than 100,000 prisoners and taken from the enemy 500 pieces of field artillery, 2,000 heavy guns, and 4 pontoon trains. The contributions laid on the countries which you have conquered have fed, maintained, and paid the army during the whole campaign, besides which you have sent 30 millions of francs to the Ministry of Finances for the relief of the public treasury. You have enriched the Museum of Paris with more than 300 of the masterpieces of art of ancient and modern Italy, works for the production of which 30 centuries were requisite. You have conquered for the Republic the finest countries of Europe. The Lombard, the Transmidan republics are indebted to you for their liberty. The French flag now waves for the first time on the shores of the Adriatic, opposite ancient Macedon, and within 24 hours sail of her shores. The kings of Sardinia and Naples, the Pope, and the Duke of Parma have abandoned the coalition of our enemies and sought our friendship. You have driven the English from Leghorn, Genoa, and Corsica. But you have not yet finished. Important deeds are still destined for you. It is in you that the nation reposes its dearest hopes. You will continue to be worthy of them. Out of so many enemies who combine to stifle the Republic in its birth, the Emperor alone remains before us. This prince, basely stooping from the rank of a great power, has enlisted in the pay of the merchants of London. He has no longer any will or policy but that of those perfidious islanders who, being themselves strangers to the calamities of war, smile with satisfaction at the miseries of the continent. The executive directory has spared nothing to obtain peace for Europe. In the moderation of its proposals, no reliance on the strength of its armies was discoverable. It had not calculated on your courage, but on humanity, and the wish to allow you to return to your families. At Vienna, it was not listened to. There are no hopes of obtaining peace, but by going to seek it in the heart of the hereditary states of the House of Austria, you will there find a brave people, overwhelmed by the war which they have lately had to sustain against the Turks, and by that in which we are engaged. The inhabitants of Vienna and the Austrian states are groaning under the blind despotism of their government. There is not an individual amongst them who is not convinced that the gold of England has corrupted the emperor's ministers. You will respect their religion and manners. You will protect their property. You will carry liberty to the brave Hungarian nation. The House of Austria, which has for 3 centuries continued to lose part of its power in each succeeding war, which alienates its people by depriving them of their privileges, will find itself reduced at the end of the 6th campaign, since it compels us to make it, to accept such peace as we may think proper to grant and to take up permanently that place among secondary powers which it already fills by accepting the wages and submitting to the will of England. Bonaparte. The army was speedily in motion. It was necessary to pass the Piave, which was defended by Prince Charles's army, and to endeavor to gain the passes of Asopo and Patema before him. Massena, with his fine division, was selected for the accomplishment of this important object. He left Bassano, passed the Piave and the Tagliamento in the mountains, thus turning the whole of the Prince Charles's army. The latter detached a division to oppose this maneuver. Massena defeated and pursued it with great slaughter, taking many prisoners and some pieces of cannon. Among these prisoners was General de Lusignan, who had insulted the sick French, his countrymen, in the hospitals of Brescia during the ephemeral success of Wurmser. Massena made himself master of Feltre, Cador, and Belluno, driving the routed Austrian division before him without suffering any considerable loss. On the 12th, the general-in-chief proceeded to Azzola with Serrurier's division, past the Piave at the break of day, marched on Conegliano, where were the Austrian headquarters, this turning all the Austrian divisions which defended the lower Piave and enabling General Guyot to effect his passage at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at Ospedaletto. The river was pretty deep there and might have required a bridge, but goodwill supplied the place of one. A German was the only person in danger, but was saved by a sutler's wife who rescued him by swimming. The general-in-chief rewarded her by putting a gold chain around her neck. On the 12th, the French general reached Conegliano with the divisions of Serrurier and Guyot. Bernadotte's division joined on the following day. Prince Charles had chosen the plains of the Tagliamento for the field of battle, thinking them advantageous for the movements of his cavalry. His rear guard attempted to maintain itself at Cecile, but was beaten by General Guyot, who entered that place on the 13th. 5th Battle of the Tagliamento, 16th March. On the 16th at 9 in the morning, the two armies confronted each other, the French on the right and the Austrians on the left bank of the Tagliamento. The divisions of Guyot, Serrurier, and Bernadotte formed the left of the center, and their right was before Valvasona with headquarters. Prince Charles, with nearly equal forces, was posted in a similar manner opposite the French on the right bank. By this position, he did not cover the road of Ponteba. The remains of the division opposed to Massena were now unable to arrest his progress, yet Ponteba was the shortest way to Vienna and the natural direction for covering that capital. This conduct on the part of Prince Charles could only be explained by supposing that he was not yet well acquainted with the new ground on which he was about to operate, and which had never been the theater of war in modern times, or that he did not believe the French general bold enough to advance to Vienna, and had no anxiety but for Trieste and the center of the naval establishments of Austria, or finally that his positions were not definitively taken, and that being covered by the Tagliamento, he hoped to gain a few days to allow a division of grenadiers who had already reached Klagenfurt to arrive and reinforce the division opposed to Massena. The cannonade commenced on the two banks. The light cavalry made several charges on the sands of the torrent. The general-in-chief, seeing the enemy too well prepared, made his men pile their arms and form the bivouacs. The Austrian general was deceived. He thought the French army, which had marched all night, was taking up a position. He fell back and returned to his bivouacs. But 2 hours afterwards, when all was quiet in both camps, the French suddenly resumed their arms, and Dufault, at the head of the 27th Light Demi Brigade, forming Guillau's vanguard, and Murat at the head of the 15th Light Demi Brigade, leading Bernadotte's vanguard, each sustained by their divisions, each brigade forming a line, and these lines supported by Serrurier marching in their rear and reserve, rushed into the river. The enemy had to run to arms, but all our troops had passed the river in the finest order and were drawn up in a line of battle on the left bank. The fire of cannon and musketry became general. At the first report of cannon, Massena effected his passage at Saint-Agnel. He met with little resistance and took Osopo, that key of the road to Ponteba, which the enemy had committed the error of neglecting. He thenceforth cut the Austrian army off from that road, separated the division opposed to him from the Austrian army, and pursued it to the bridge of Carasola, constantly driving it towards Carinthia. Prince Charles despaired of victory. After several hours fighting in different charges of infantry and cavalry, he commenced his retreat, leaving us some cannon and prisoners. Sixth, Prince Charles's plan of retreat. Prince Charles could no longer retreat towards Ponteba by the road of Saint-Agnel and Sapo, which Massena held in his position. He determined to regain that road at Tarbes with the greater part of his army by Udine, Cividale, Caporetto, and the Austrian Chiusa. He ordered one of his divisions to his left by Palma, Nova, Gradisca, and lay back to cover Carniola. But Massena was only 2 days' march from Tarbes, and the Austrian army, by this new route, had 5 or 6 marches to make. Prince Charles, therefore, compromised his army. He was sensible of it and hastened in person to Klagenfurt to press the march of a division of grenadiers which was there. Massena himself had, however, lost 2 days, but having received orders to advance in Tarbes without hesitation, he there met with Prince Charles with the wreck of the division which had been flying before him all the way from the Piave, and a fine division of Hungarian grenadiers. The action was brisk and obstinate on both sides. Each felt the importance of success. For if Massena should succeed in gaining possession of the debouché of Tarbes, the part of the Austrian army which Prince Charles had led into the Vale of Isonzo would be lost. Prince Charles ran the greatest personal risk and was several times on the point of being taken by the French skirmishers. General Brune, who commanded a brigade of Massena's division, displayed the greatest valor. Prince Charles's troops were broken. He had made his very last reserves engaged. He could operate no retreat. The remains of his troops proceeded beyond the draft to rally there. Massena, being master of Tarbes, established himself there, facing towards Villac and Gorlitz, and barring the debouchés of Isonzo. 7. Action of Gradisca, taking a layback entry. The day after the battle of the Tagliamento, the headquarters were moved to Palma Nova, a fortress belonging to the Venetians. Prince Charles had caused it to be occupied and had established his magazines there, but judging that he should be obliged to leave 5,000 or 6,000 men to guard it, his garrison guns, not having arrived, had resolved to evacuate it. We immediately fortified it and secured it from a coup de main. On the following day, the 19th, we marched on the Isonzo. General Bernadette appeared before Gradisca. To pass the Isonzo there, he found the town shut and was received with discharges of cannon. It was wished to parley with the commandant of the place, who refused. Napoleon then sent out with Souri's division, took the road of Montfaucon, and marched as far as the point where the left bank of the river no longer commands the right. He was obliged to lose time in constructing a bridge. Colonel Andreossi, the director of bridges, was the first to throw himself into the river to sound its depth. The columns followed his example and passed up to the middle in water under the feeble fire of 2 battalions of Croats, who were soon put to flight. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The troops turned to the left and ascended the heights, traversing them as far as Gradisca, which they reached at 5 in the evening. Thus the place was surrounded and commanded. Souri's division had marched with the greater rapidity because the firing of musketry was brisk on the right bank, where Bernadette was already engaged. This general had had the imprudence to attempt to carry the place by assault. He had been repulsed and had unnecessarily lost 500 men. This excessive ardor was excused by the desire of the troops of the Sambre and Meuse to signalize themselves, and by the noble emulation of reaching Gradisca before the old troops of Italy. When the governor of Gradisca saw the Isonzo passed and the heights covered with troops, he capitulated and surrendered prisoner of war with several regiments and many pieces of cannon. The headquarters were removed on the following day to Goritz. Bernadette's division was directed on Laybach. General de Gun, with 1,000 cavalry, took possession of Souri's division from Goritz, reascended the Isonzo to support General Gayeux and to regain the road to Corinth. At Tarvis, General Gayeux had marched from the field of battle of the Tagliamento towards Utine and Civitol and had entered the road of the Isonzo at Caporetto. He had had serious actions every day with Prince Charles as principal corps, which had taken the same road to reach Tarvis. He had killed or made prisoners great numbers of his troops. The Austrian general had left a rear guard on the Venetian Chiusa and had proceeded to Tarvis, hoping that Prince Charles still occupied that place, but Messina had been 2 days there. He was attacked in front by Messina and in the rear by Gayeux. Not even the strong position of the Venetian Chiusa could resist the impetuous fourth of the line, who, with unparalleled rapidity, climbed a mountain which commands the left of the Chiusa, and thus turning this important post, left the enemy no resource but to lay down their arms. All their baggage, artillery, stores, and colors were taken. Only 5,000 prisoners were made, 10,000 having been killed or wounded in different engagements. Since the battle of the Tagliamento, 10,000 soldiers, inhabitants of Carniola and Croce, seeing that all was lost, disbanded themselves in the passes and sought their own villages one by one. Headquarters were transferred successfully to Caporetto, Tarvis, Villach, and Klagenfurt. 8. Entrance into Germany. Passage of the Drave taken to Klagenfurt, March 29th. The province of Goritz, which is the first of the hereditary states of the House of Austria, borders on Italy. The inhabitants speak Italian. This province was organized without delay. The old castle of Goritz was fortified and garrisoned. A provisional government was composed of the 7 most considerable persons who were entrusted with the administration of the country. All measures were taken to tranquilize the minds of the inhabitants and to alleviate their burden unavoidably imposed on them by the garrison. Similar measures were taken at Trieste for Istria. All English merchandise was confiscated. The old castle was repaired to serve as a refuge for the little garrison which it was intended to leave there. The inhabitants were very favorably disposed towards the French. Laybach is the capital of Carniola. A provisional government was established there on the same principles as at Goritz and Trieste. This city was put in a state of defense. It had a wall with bastions of very ancient design. The houses on the ramparts were destroyed. In these countries situated near the Alps, the weather was still cold. The inhabitants, who had at first been terrified, had every reason to be satisfied with the French army, nor had the latter any cause of complaint against these people. The inhabitants of the circle of Villach appeared amicably disposed towards the French. They supplied everything necessary for the army with great readiness. We were in Germany. Matters there were different. Our soldiers had great reason to be pleased with the characteristic hospitality of the Germans. They procured a great quantity of horses and wagons with greater ease than in Italy, and these were of great service. The town of Klagenfurt, the capital of Carinthia, was also put in a state of defense, and a provisional government was organized there also. This town has a wall with bastions, but it had been neglected for centuries and was of no use but for the police of the city. The houses which covered the ramparts being pulled down, these fortifications became a point of appui for the army. General Turgot at Trieste confiscated all the stores belonging to the English or Austrians. They were considerable and of all descriptions. Possession was likewise taken of the mines of Adria. Quicksilver to the value of several millions of francs was found there, which was forthwith dispatched to Palma Nova. On entering into Carinthia, the following proclamation had been published. The French army does not come into your country to conquer it or to enforce any alteration in your religion, manners, or customs. It is the friend of all nations, and particularly of the brave people of Germany. The executive directory of the French Republic has spared no endeavor to put an end to the calamities which afflict the continent. It has determined to make the first advance and to send General Clarke to Vienna as a plenipotentiary to commence negotiations for peace. But the court of Vienna refused to listen to it, and even declared at Vicenza, through the medium of Monsieur de Saint Vincent, that it did not acknowledge the French Republic. General Clarke demanded a passport in order to address himself to the emperor in person, but the ministers of the court of Vienna were justly apprehensive that the moderation of the proposals he was instructed to offer might determine the emperor to make peace. Those ministers, corrupted by English gold, betrayed Germany and their prince, and have no other will than that of those treacherous islanders whom all Europe abhors. Inhabitants of Carinthia, I know that you detest as much as we do both the English, who are the only gainers by the present war, and your ministry, which is sold to them. If we have been 6 years at war, it has been against the will of the brave Hungarians, of the enlightened citizens of Vienna, and of the honest, unsophisticated inhabitants of Carinthia. Well, in spite of England and of the ministers of the court of Vienna, let us be friends. The French Republic has the rights of conquest over you. Let them be annulled by a contract of mutual obligation. You will not interfere in a war carried on contrary to your inclinations. You will furnish the provisions of which we may stand in need. On my side, I will protect your religion, manners, and property. I shall require no contribution of you. It is not war in itself sufficiently horrible? Have you not suffered enough already, innocent victims of the folly of others? All the taxes you are accustomed to pay the emperor will serve to indemnify you for the damage inseparable from the march of an army, and to pay for the provisions you may furnish us with. The 9th, affairs of the Tyrol. Immediately after the battle of Tagliamento, the French general sent orders to General Joubert to attack the army opposed to him, to take possession of all the Italian Tyrol, to execute boldly the march which he had prescribed to him, and to penetrate into Carinthia by the Puthurthal. General Joubert commenced his operations on the 28th of March. Passy Avizio defeated the enemy, took several thousand prisoners. Passy Adish defeated the enemy at Tramin, took Bolzano, engaged again at Clausen, forced the passes of Innsbruck on the 28th, repulsed the Austrian troops beyond the Brenner, and directed his march into Carinthia. After having caused the enemy great loss and taken 7,000 or 8,000 of his men, General Joubert showed much talent, constancy, and activity in the conduct of this difficult operation. Generals Delma, Berrigay-Dillier, and Dumas distinguished themselves. The troops evinced the greatest intrepidity.